I'm Jess Dakotas.
And I'm Nick Colziel. Welcome to That Sounds Terrifying, the podcast where we share terrifying stories, we share listener experiences, and we visit virtually some of the most haunted places in the United States and the world. Welcome back, everyone, to That Sounds Terrifying. I am joined, and Jess is joined with Rissa Miller, a very special guest, which has so many stories to tell and so many experiences that I can't possibly introduce her and better than she can introduce herself. So I just want to welcome you to the show, Rissa. Thanks for being here with us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Nick and Jess. It's absolutely a pleasure.
Awesome. Well, why don't we just kind of get started to learn a little bit about you and what you do, and then we'll kind
Sure.
of get into some stories. I know you have a lot of different sources in your life that you kind of
Mhm,
shared off the air about how these things have kind of intertwined. So
mhm.
why don't we start with just something simple like, who are you and what do you do?
Sure, that sounds great. So I'm Rissa, and I actually do wear a number of hats in my life. I am a ghost tour guide. I am a ghost tour operator. I'm a historian. I specialize in occult and esoterica. And I also am an herbalist and a practicing diviner, meaning I do tarot cards, tea leaf reading, smoke scrying, and all of these things to me are related. They're all forms of storytelling, and I consider that to sort of be my craft and art.
Very nice, very nice.
Teach me.
Yes, yes.
Oh my God. Oh my,
How
like,
did
oh my God.
Yeah,
Tea leaf reading and smoke scrying. Yes. That
yeah.
seems so cool. I want to do that.
Well, Jess, they're actually not all that different from each other, to be honest with you. Tea leaf reading is another form of scrying. And I always tell people if you can do one kind of scrying, you can do them all. You just have to get
Mhm.
used to the different medium. So when you're gazing into lit smoke, you are looking for shapes and patterns. When you're looking at the surface of a turned teacup, you're looking for shapes and patterns. When you're gazing into still water, you're looking for shapes and patterns. All of the scrying is related in that way, which is why it is such an early form of divination. So historically, people didn't have tarot cards. They're actually kind of the baby in the divination world. The only things newer are the magic 8 ball and the Ouija board. And I guess you could include AI in that now because AI is doing an awful lot of divination for us.
Mhm.
So aside from that, scrying goes back to times BC. And it is basically a form of looking and then interpreting symbols. So it's two-step process to learn it. I think anyone can do it, but it does take some patience. Yes, there are people who have a natural proclivity for it, but then that you can say that of everything, right? There are some people who are naturally gifted and other people who learn it. So what you need to learn to do is to see shapes and symbols and things, and then the second step is learning a language of symbols. You could find this anywhere. In fact, you already know symbols, and you probably aren't even thinking about it right now. You definitely have a vocabulary to begin with, especially Jess, you said you're a tarot reader. You have
I
all
am,
the
yeah.
symbols from the
Mhm.
tarot that you can begin with, as
Hmm.
well as the ones we use in everyday life. Think a dollar sign. That is a symbol. It's an agreed upon symbol that everybody in America, at least, uses to represent money. So basically, you have to learn to read a story in symbols if you're going to scry in a teacup or smoke or anything else. I make it sound easy. It does take some time to practice this, but it is a totally doable thing if you're interested in learning it.
Yeah,
That's so
absolutely.
cool.
I mean, I think about how tarot to me is now just kind of a second nature thing, but
Mhm.
even then I'm still looking up like, okay, what does that mean, like just in the back of my head. Usually when I'm reading other people, the intuition comes in, and I'm hearing spirit and it's easy. When I
Mhm.
read for myself though, it's very difficult, and I'm like, what does this mean? And I'm like, I really shouldn't read for myself, but it's just good
Well, I
practice.
never read for myself, even after a lifetime with divination. I started tea leaf reading, teaching myself tea leaf reading at 16. And I've been doing it ever since. I grew up with tarot. It's been in my life forever.
Mm.
And I don't read for myself. Twice a year, I will pay someone I trust to read for me. Here it is. I don't look at the cards for myself in an unbiased way. I
Hmm.
just don't.
Mm.
If I'm reading for someone else, I'm completely unbiased and I'm open to their story and their energy.
Right.
If I'm looking at the cards for myself, I'm going to bend them into what I want them to be, no matter what.
Hmm.
And I simply don't trust myself to do that. I also don't read for people I'm very close to, like, my parents or siblings, things like that. I
Mm.
just don't trust myself not to be
Yeah, bias.
unfazed by my relationship with them.
Yeah,
Right.
that's super interesting. And you said that, this has been going on in your family for a couple generations, I think,
Mhm.
right? So how did that, how did you, how did this all begin, I guess, for you?
I don't remember, to be honest with you. It was just always present. It was
Hmm.
just something that was always around. And I was never taught to be afraid of it. I was also never taught to be afraid of ghosts, which I might be interesting on a podcast
Yeah.
called That's Terrifying. But that's also not something I'm afraid of. I'm not saying there aren't bad things out there. There
Hmm.
are, absolutely. But to approach them with fear is to give them your power.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
I generally don't do that with anything. I'm not going to approach it with fear. I'm going to approach it with confidence.
Hmm.
So that's kind of how I approach divination and ghosts and speaking in public, all of it. Now, how did I get started? I just sort of learned along the way. And what's really interesting? Tarot is having a revival in, I'd say, the past 5 to 7 years, and a lot of people have learned from what they call the little white book, which is the book that comes with the Smith Rider White deck.
Hmm.
And I felt like I was so much less than learning in a family tradition than the people who had learned from the book. Of course, I've long ago had the book, but I read very differently than people who read from a book because I was taught to do it across years of time, just as part of a tradition. And so I don't always interpret things the way the book does. And I've had people go, "Oh, well, that's not what that means in the book." I'm like, "Nope, but I'm reading for you. So either you trust me or you don't. And if you don't, this should be over." And basically, I've come to terms with the fact that it's completely okay to read in any way that feels good for you, whether someone taught you, or you took a class, or your grandma taught you, or you learned it from a book.
Hmm.
However, you work through your divining gifts is the right way for you. And for me, that just happens to be how my family read.
Hmm. That's an interesting
Absolutely.
point. Yeah. I mean, there in anything you do, there's no just one way to do it, right? There's no one
Absolutely.
right way.
Yep.
So that's a really good point. I'm sorry, Jess, I kind of cut you off.
Oh, that's fine. So, I guess I was just going to refer back to your point that, I read it this way. I've had readings, and I've taken classes, and actually amongst the classes, it's all different too. There's different books to read. Um, and I had a reading last fall, and I was open to it, but there's the Seven of Swords. And in the
Hmm.
book, the Seven of Swords is like somebody's gonna betray you, or it could be a betrayal, or
It
somebody's being
it can
sneaky.
be.
It
It
can
can be.
be.
Yeah.
And then she was like, "This is the card." She looked at it and she goes, "This is the card of ultimate success." And I was like, "The Seven of Swords?" And she was like, "Yeah, to me, this is the card of ultimate success." And I was like, "I'll take it." That's the way I
So, absolutely, she has a different vision, like, that's the guy who ran away with all the swords.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I can see where she's coming from, especially if she's interpreting, the Pamela Coleman Smith drawings. You're the guy who got away with everything,
With everything.
you
Yeah.
know?
And I was just like, okay. Yeah, I mean, like, but I was
Yeah,
shocked
the
at first
ultimate
because
success to me, I'd be like, 10 of coins, you
yeah,
know?
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, but yeah, she was like, "Yep, this is ultimate success." And there were some other things that were just different because I think she learned probably the same way you did through family or just
Mhm.
um it went further back. And so I'm super open to that too. I'm of the idea that when you're reading, even if you're taught a certain thing, sometimes spirit comes in and they'll tell you, "No, I want you to just pay attention to this on the card. And
Right.
that's what this card means for this." And so it takes on just a totally different meaning than what you were taught. And if you're
Mhm.
intuitive and you're listening, then you really do get that meaning and it'll be totally different. But, you know, just like when I was the sitter, you know, and I was just,
Right.
you know, so I love that. And I think that that's super important to talk about too, because sometimes we see different cards, and if you do read, you do have a little fear, you know, about it. Just because you'll see like a 3 of Swords, and it'll be like, you know what, it's not as bad as you think, you know, something like that.
Or it could actually be to your benefit. You
Right.
know, sometimes the Tower comes in and it takes away what you didn't have the courage to let go of.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And that's not always an easy thing to do, but sometimes it is a necessary step to move forward.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, people fear it a lot. And when they find out that I read, and I'm sure that this has happened to you many times, when they find out you read, I mean, aside from the fact that people think it's, you know, there's certain factions who think it's a negative and, you know, sort of thing. Um, but they also just have a fear like, well, I don't want to know if I'm going to die. I don't want to know. And I'm like, nobody's going to tell you that, because we
Well,
wouldn't know.
nobody ethical is going to tell you that.
Yeah, yes,
Yeah.
yes. Nobody ethical is going to say that. You're right. But also, like, nobody has an expiration date stamped on their foot. And I
No.
really have a hard time believing that spirit would be like, oh, by the way, this person's gonna die. You know, like that's just not something of love and light would do, which I like to operate on. And I know, you know, like you said, ethical readers operate on that path as well. So
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, there is a lot of fear hanging on the tarot, and a lot of that is fairly recent, to be totally honest, in the realm of history. So, I mean, just a few weeks ago, a movie came out called Tarot, and it's
Mhm.
about a group of college kids who find a beautiful old hand painted tarot deck in a dusty pile of old occult objects. I'm like, please let it happen to me. But
yeah.
hasn't worked out for me, but
Right.
these college kids find one. So, and of course, the deck is cursed, and the cards come to life and start killing them violently. And I'm here thinking, like, this is why people are afraid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is why people are afraid, because they
Right.
see images like this portrayed in the media, and or you go back to the Satanic Panic in the
Hmm.
1980s when the devil
80s.
card was in the front of the deck, and everybody sees this, and suddenly, you know, because of the things going on in society, more fear and more trepidation is attached to something that to me is just a tool. It is just a tool for talking to, as you said, just spirit. And, you know, different people define that differently. Some people talk to their ancestors, some people talk to guides, some people talk to angels, some people talk to spirit. Sometimes I walk into a space and I want to talk to the benevolent ghosts of the space, and
Yeah.
I will call on them.
Hmm.
But it's kind of like, who are you talking to? If
Right.
you're worried about who you're talking to, you need to be more specific with your intentions.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, I honestly, I feel the same way about the Ouija board. I was telling Nick before we started, just last night, I did a talk on Victorian Gothic at a museum here in Maryland. And one of my talking points was the Ouija board. It is just a tool, it is a piece of cardboard with plastic. And if people have regular fears of cardboard and plastic, that's a personal concern they should address. However, it is a tool for talking to spirit. And if you have bad intentions going into it, then you're going to get bad results. If you go into it with fear and you're expecting something awful, like deep in your soul, then you're probably going to get that. And that's how I feel about that, as I feel
Hmm.
about any tool. You know, as I have often told people who come to, you know, ask me questions after I speak, they say, you know, how can you not be afraid of the Ouija board, for example? I'm like, well, I've never had a negative experience with it, and I've never entered into it looking for one.
Right.
But I feel deeply that if you want to call on a dark entity, all you need is your voice. You don't need a single tool. And
Hmm.
sooner or later, if you keep calling into the void, it will answer. Just keep calling. You don't
Right.
need a Ouija board or a deck of tarot cards or any other thing.
Yeah, intent is a powerful thing. Like,
It is
with
indeed.
whatever you're doing, whatever your intent is, you're gonna like if you're looking for trouble, you're gonna find trouble. There's that old
Hmm.
adage,
It's
right?
always that way. I mean,
Yeah.
it certainly has been that way my whole life.
Right. So, and then going back to your comment about the movie, like when, Jaws came out, that was the same
Mhm.
kind of thing. There was
Yeah,
no fear really about shark attacks, but then Jaws
right.
came out and there was this panic about sharks everywhere. And they, even to the point where they were, organizing huge fishing trips to kill off sharks. So,
I have
I
so
get what
many
you're
questions
saying
about
there.
this. Yeah, yeah.
But,
It's like, this
I'd
is a
love,
part of the ecosystem. We need this.
We kind
right?
of need it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I would love to, like, I know, this is all awesome. And I was telling Jess and everyone before we even started recording, we're probably going to have you back on the show because there's just so much content that we can pull from
I
you.
know it's so
And,
amazing.
and like Jess is like, teach me. I'm like, teach me, this is going to be really, really cool. But I'd love to kind of also hear some stories because I know,
Yeah.
the paranormal and the ghost part of it was also something that started relatively young for you, and maybe we can get into some of that.
Sure. So, I would have to say my very first paranormal experience was when I was really little. I am quite convinced that I could remember my former life's death. And I very distinctly remember drowning and seeing fish in clear blue Caribbean water. And obviously, I grew up in Pennsylvania. I had never seen that as a child. don't think I've ever even saw a picture of it when I was that little. But I remember telling my parents about this scene where I was sinking into the ocean and there were fish and the water was clear blue and I could describe the colors very accurately. And they were confounded because I, as a child, had never seen or been exposed to anything like that. So that was my very first experience with something unexplained. And then my parents were they're alive still. I didn't mean were, they are. They're very open people. And they never told me to be afraid of anything. They never told me, like, no, you don't see a ghost. When I was 8 years old, they took me to England with them on vacation, which was lucky, right? Because not every 8-year-old gets to take a trip like
No.
that.
No.
Yeah.
And in addition to all the tours of castles and educational things, which of course I loved because I was always who I am now, they took me on a ghost tour. And at the very end of it, we went to a restaurant that was then called Marmaduke's, and it is still an Italian restaurant to this day. And you can go there, and maybe you'll have the same experience. I don't know. There is a room upstairs, and this was not part of the ghost tour. There was a room upstairs where, unfortunately, a teenage boy ended his life
Mm.
because he was different. We would probably say he was a special needs person today, but in 17th century, um, in 17th century England, they thought he was a witch. They thought he was a bad person. They thought because he was different that he should die. So he was basically hounded and hounded and hounded, and then took his own life in the upstairs of his parents' home. The rooms is still there. And when I was a child, I walked into that room trying to find the bathroom, and I saw a full body apparition of him. His name was Marmaduke. And it did leave a very big impression on me.
Mm.
My mom was right behind me, and as I went out to tell her, "There's a man in here," she came in and he had disappeared. My mother was fantastic in that she didn't say, "You were imagining it, you're making it up." I knew I wasn't. I knew I wasn't making it up. I knew what I saw. How many times have you heard somebody say that? I
Mhm.
know what I saw.
Hmm.
And she was just like, "Okay." She's like, "So let's find that bathroom and then we'll ask and see who it might have been." And then we found out the story of Marmaduke, and that they had named the restaurant after him as well.
Mhm.
So I have reached out. The ghost tour company in York, England, is still in existence, and they said that they believe that place to still be haunted. They believe that Marmaduke is a residual. That
Mhm.
the way he appears is exactly in the moments when he decided to end his life, and in that act, I did not see him hanging. Luckily, as a little girl,
Mhm.
I saw him probably as they described it back to me, contemplating what he was about to do. So
Mhm.
it is that heavy, energetic imprint that you get with the residual. That is what I experienced first as ghostly activity.
Yeah, and that was on a, like, not on the ghost tour, but in a place with a ghost tour. And
York,
um
England is considered one of the most haunted parts of Europe
yeah.
because of its history. So it definitely clicked.
Yeah. So
Definitely influenced my life too, because by the time I was 15, I became a tour guide as well.
I was going to ask that. That's awesome.
so I have a question. What did he look like?
The feeling that hit me first about him before the visual was the incredible sadness
Mhm.
and the sense of loneliness. And I think that's because this is one of my first profound experiences. It kind of colored how I see ghosts. I usually see them with empathy first,
Mhm.
and then I start to like look for the facts and like who were they?
Mhm.
Why are they still here? What are they looking for? Um, the sadness was overwhelming, the heaviness of the space. And then he was standing first, and he didn't walk normally. He had like kind of a limp. And then I find out years later in my research that he indeed had a limp, and that was part of why people didn't treat him the same. And he was tall and thin, very thin. And of course, historically, that would have made sense too. I didn't know that at the time. And he had on, I would not describe them as like a rich person's clothes from that time. I would describe them almost as spare clothing that would have been historically accurate to the 17th century. And at the time, I think I would have just told my mom something like, he's wearing old fashioned clothes or
Hmm.
antique clothes.
Right.
Because those were the words that I had for it at that time.
Sure.
um, and his hair was, it was short, but not like a neat short haircut that you would think of now. I never looked him in the face, but he did have a face. And it was just kind of like him walking towards the center of the room. And then when I turned to tell my mom, he was gone. The
Hmm.
story that I have been told about that particular historic figure is that he then proceeded to throw a rope up and get a chair, and he ended his life by hanging.
Hmm.
But some people see him in that act, and
Yeah.
I'm honestly really glad that I didn't. That would have been a really jarring experience for me as a little girl.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Well, I think that we're only given what we can handle when it comes to that stuff too. Even if
But
it
you know,
is,
it was definitely profound though, because it
Yeah.
it did change how I would go forward.
Right.
yeah, I
Yeah.
think that
My
that's
I was just gonna say, like, you were talking about feeling things, so I feel things. I can feel the overwhelming sadness, and like I get that to like my very core, and that's the
Mhm.
experiences that I usually have. My father has seen things, and we've shared a couple of his tales on the show, so that part hasn't reached me yet. And I think, in a way, even what Jess just said, like I think that that's good because I'm not sure if I'd be able to handle it as well if I'm seeing things, right? So maybe
Right.
that's kind of like why I don't see things. But then part of me is like when I'm on a ghost tour, and I've been on several, like part of me is like, I want to see something. I want to see, like, and I never do. And maybe because I'm so much energy is going out that I'm so excited to see something that I'm blocking out what would allow me to see something or experience something.
It's the act of allowing that can be difficult.
Hmm.
Um, when you want something, you have to allow it to come to you, and that
Hmm.
can be that can be challenging to sit and wait and allow it
Hmm.
instead
right.
of seeking it actively.
Right. And that's
Yeah.
why I think kids are so open because they're just absorb everything and they want to feel the world around them, and they're so open to that environment that's why
Mhm.
they experience more. Um so but
Most
that's
of my
really.
clairvoyant experiences have been when I wasn't looking. I can tell
Mhm.
you that for sure. I do still have them to this day. They always happen when my mind is on something else, when I'm, working or reading or sometimes driving.
Mhm.
Um, I am not looking for it to happen, and then it hits.
Mhm.
Um, so clairaudient activities come in at other times. I can usually access those, but clairvoyant only happens when I'm not looking for it.
Mhm.
Same. I find that a lot of times I'll be either driving or riding in the car, and all of a sudden I'll
Mhm.
have a knowing. And I'm like,
Mhm.
this is interesting.
Yeah.
And I'll say something to whomever I'm with, or like I'll just kind of think on it if I'm alone. But yeah, it does. You're right. It just kind of comes in, and you're like, what? I wasn't
Yeah.
Super interesting.
yeah, and it's a knowing. That's really cool. I love that. So you were 8 when that happened. And then what happened next? Like was it a while before you saw or had another encounter?
So somewhere along the line, I did encounter a shadow person as a young girl, and I would not put that in the same category. Honestly,
Mhm.
I wasn't scared because I'd been taught not to be, but I was also truly precocious, and I didn't let it intimidate me. I remember seeing the shadow person walk through my childhood bedroom, and I remember it happening multiple times. And I remember the day that it stopped to turn and talk to me. I did not see glowing red eyes, and the one I saw did not have a hat.
Mm.
So I remember it trying to like gather my interest and me going, but who are you? Why are you
Mm.
here? What are you interested in? What, like I'm just a question asker. That's who I
Mhm.
am.
Mhm.
And I was always that way. And it eventually, I think, decided that I was a total pain and it just left. And I've never seen one again. I haven't looked for
Oh.
one also, but I haven't seen one again. And I've
Mhm.
been in many places where they allegedly appear. So I don't know if I just vibrate differently and I'm not of interest to them, or maybe they passed along a note like ignore her, she's so annoying. So
That's
either
awesome.
way, but that was one of
All
my
point.
other very early experiences with the paranormal, was indeed a shadow person. I didn't know that word then,
Right.
but I do
Yeah.
know it now.
That's kind of a relatively newer term, shadow
Yeah,
person, where
Mhm.
they
but it's
finally
certainly
were
not a
like,
new phenomenon.
Yeah.
no, no, people have been seeing them, you know, probably since the beginning of time. I don't know,
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
but yeah, but that's shadow person is just now becoming part of like the actual like vernacular in the paranormal
Hmm.
world, like probably over the last 10 years, you
Yeah,
know?
that sounds about right to me too.
Yeah. But it is also interesting to me that you knew, and this is what I'm hoping to instill in my children. I think
Hmm.
just the past episode we were talking about this, or maybe two ago, where I don't want my children to be afraid because I know that they're both intuitive and I
Hmm.
know they're going to see things and it's already started, and I
Yeah.
want them to know that their power comes from within them, that sort of thing. But the fact that you knew at a young age to just ask questions when you see these things, don't be stuck in fear, ask
Hmm.
questions, is very telling. Like, I feel like you've probably worked through this through many, many lifetimes to get to where you are here, to have that kind of comfortability, to know that instinctively. I just need to ask you some questions to know. And in your case, it was just to get you to go away. Just to get the shadow person to be like, yeah, there's nothing here for me. I'm not.
Yeah. And then there's an
Like,
all points bulletin where no shadow
yeah.
people are allowed to approach this woman
Yeah.
forever.
Well, again, I don't know how they operate. I don't know how they work. It's one of those things that thousands of people have probably reported these incidents, right? And I love to collect ghost stories from other people. And I have collected a lot of shadow people stories over the years. And everybody feels the same when they are approached by one. There's that like gut drop
Mhm.
Yeah.
feeling, right?
Yeah.
I remember having the gut drop feeling, but not necessarily, it didn't compute with me like show fear, show submission. I didn't do that, even as a kid. And probably even more not as a kid, to be honest.
Interesting.
And I remember the gut drop feeling, but I was just like, all right, I need to figure out what's going on here, before I can address it. I have to understand what this
Mhm.
is, because at that point I hadn't interacted with any entities, and I knew I was awake. I knew I wasn't dreaming,
Right.
and I knew I had seen it multiple times, because as a little kid I had a lot of trouble going to sleep,
Mhm.
and it was usually when I wasn't sleeping and I should have been that it would come through the wall and walk through out
Mhm.
the other wall to the outside. So, come to find out, only in the past few months, that neighborhood I grew up in, I've been collecting ghost stories from people there, and a lot of people there have seen a shadow person. I was really surprised. I was like, I guess that's the shadow neighborhood that shadow person works.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So,
So you started to
Wow.
talk a little bit about having interactions with spirits. So that would be kind of a cool part to move on to, right? To kind of hear a little bit more about. You've got your first experience is 8, you see a ghost, then you scare the heck out of all shadow people so they never come back. So what's a kind of paranormal experience now where you're like interacting?
well, they come in all different forms, to be
Sure.
honest with you. Sometimes it is a clairaudient experience where I hear them. Other times it is more like you were talking about the clairsentience, where you're knowing, like
Mhm.
what's going on. And I have worked with investigation teams as the medium, and I've also worked with other mediums as a team as well. And it's interesting to work with another medium because we all have different ways, and it's the best when you get the same answers and you're both on the same page. So I'm trying to think of a recent story that's actually really good. I'm
Yeah.
gonna go with this one.
Oh, can I just ask
So
you one question before you kind of pop into that? So, like, have you
yeah.
ever, when you're working with another medium, have you ever kind of like written things down,
Oh
or
yes, constantly. We
and
take tons
not
of notes.
and not
Sometimes we just
share it?
record. Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
okay. And that's
Um,
how you've gotten reaffirmed. That's
yep.
kind of cool.
Mhm. Yeah,
Awesome.
usually we're both holding a tablet.
Okay.
Yeah. Like one of us will audibly ask a question, and unless there's something remarkable, like things move in the room, we both
Mhm.
write down our answer,
Okay.
and then we show each other.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. So this is a story I will relate. Sometimes when I know I'm going on an investigation, a night or two before, I start having dreams. And sometimes I have historic information about the building, sometimes I don't. Sometimes that's confusing because that ends up not being what the haunting is about at all.
Hmm.
Um, one time we were investigating a space that was a girls' school in the past, and we fully expected that to be the answer, and it was not. That was not who was there. It was nothing to do with it being a girls' school. It was everything to do with a woman who had worked there as a domestic years later. So that was just information that led us the wrong way.
Hmm.
And so the building I'm going to tell you about is in York, Pennsylvania. It's now a shop called the Feral Hearts Club, and it's a vintage store. And if you walked in, you'd immediately feel like dancing. It is so cute. It is really bright and colorful. It's full of great vintage clothes, and there are disco balls hanging from the ceiling. It's got like lava lamp, the whole vibe. So, in this case, I was able to go into it with a lot of historic knowledge of the building. I knew that there had been two deaths there in the early 1900s. I knew that there had been an employment agency there for many, many decades, like 5 or 6 decades. I knew history of a lot of the businesses that had been there. So I was looking for all these specific things, and I was on the wrong track again. So while the history of the building was very interesting and telling, it had nothing to do with the haunting. The haunting turned out to be a young woman who had died in a car crash in 1974. We did later find her obituary. She told us her name was JoJo, and that can be short for Josephine or any number of other names. And I was
Yeah.
working with the other medium, and I said JoJo, and he wrote down Joanna. And we went on to find out that she was a very recent ghost. 1974, in the terms of history, is not that long ago. And we both got that she had died in a car accident, and that she loved fashion. She loved clothes in her life. And then also, we kept both hearing disco music. So turns out the owner of the shop, a lovely young woman, likes disco music too, and she plays it there all the time. So Joanna
Oh.
never had an affiliation with that building. She moved there from where she had previously been situated
Hmm.
because she liked the store and she liked the girl who was running it. She moved into a space that felt homey to her and felt comfortable. And when later we looked her up and we found an obituary for a young woman she went to high school where we both got that she'd gone to high school. We found the car accident. Um, we found out that she had been a seamstress in her life. So of course she loved clothes. We found out all this actual data about her that neither of us could have possibly come up with, especially because we were going and looking for someone from the early 1900s.
Right.
That's because those were the deaths in the building. That's where we thought we would start, and we both just kept getting no, 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 and it took a while to sort of suss out and get on the right path because we were affected by the data beforehand.
Hmm.
So, but yes, JoJo is a delightful ghost. She also roller skates, and sometimes that's how people know she's there because you hear her roller skates clacking on the wooden floors.
Wow. That's really cool. And Jess was just talking about that a few episodes ago about how ghosts are not always like tied to a place. And
Not always.
that's something that I didn't even realize. So I love the show because I learned a lot of things about,
Mhm.
spiritual things and paranormal things that I just never thought of. So that's cool to kind of hear that again too.
What was so people could hear the roller skates. What tipped off this? Was it the building owner that called you in? Was it the store owner?
The shopkeeper, yeah.
Okay. And what was she hearing besides the roller skates? Were things moving? What was this ghost
Just had a
doing?
funny feeling, and her lava light would turn itself on.
Okay.
And
Mm.
she knew I was doing ghost tours around town, and she's just like, can you come check this place out? And sure enough, I went in there first to talk to her, and I ended up buying a dress.
Of
But
course. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome.
even in that moment, I was like, oh yeah, there's somebody here.
Yeah.
And I almost felt like when I came in to shop, the spirit stepped away.
Mm.
And then when I started trying on, like going through dresses to seriously try on, I almost felt like somebody guided me to a spot I would normally have gone.
Mhm.
And that's where I found the dress. And I
Yeah.
always in the 80s and 90s, I guess, when Betsy Johnson was huge, I wanted a Betsy Johnson dress so bad. And I was guided right to a vintage Betsy Johnson dress that fit me perfectly.
Oh,
That
wow.
I honestly wasn't, I'm not sure I would have found it otherwise, but I feel like JoJo kind of like said, here,
Well, she's a fashion
Yeah.
ghost, right?
right? She's a fashion ghost.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
That is. I'm wondering, when you find these ghosts, it sounds like she was happy there. But sometimes when
I
ghosts
think
are
she was happier there than maybe where she had been because she felt like she walked back into her place. Like
right,
with
like
the
where she
disco
was
balls
comfortable.
and the music and the clothes, it was a perfect match for her and for the shopkeeper. They
Yeah.
kind of they kind of go together.
Mhm.
Yeah. But I'm wondering, when you meet these ghosts, because they're not connected to the light if they're stuck here, right? If they're on this plane, so they
Right.
have to get their energy from something. I assume she's getting it from the customers and the shopkeeper and that building. So I'm wondering, do you ever ask them, "Hey, are you trying to move on? Are you lost? Do you want to move on? Have you ever helped somebody cross over?"
I have no experience with that. So unfortunately I don't have much to contribute on that
Mhm.
question.
That's fine.
Um
Just wondering.
Also because a lot of the ghosts that I see or run into are residuals.
Mhm.
And I don't think they're the same. I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
that they are kind of like energetic imprints that are just like a scar. Like I have the scar from my curling iron. I
Right.
think it's the same.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
if it's not an intelligent haunt, then there's
Right.
nothing to be done. But in the case of JoJo, where she's obviously very active and like,
Yes.
around, yeah, I always just wonder, what do we do, especially when you find children ghosts and they are legit children and not an entity? How do you help them? Like how do we help them, move on or if they want to? A lot of times I've from
So often I have found with the children and or people who die tragically, they're
Mhm.
still waiting for someone who's never coming,
Right.
like a parent or a loved one, and they don't. They're not always ready to hear that that person's not coming.
Mhm.
Like I can actually think of a child ghost who's waiting for his mom to come home. Mom's not coming home. He's been dead a long time. Mom passed on a long time ago.
Mhm.
And how do, if someone's not willing to hear it, you
Right.
can't tell it.
Mhm.
Right. Yeah. Um, I find that part of this, and maybe it's a personal calling of mine, but I do love the idea of helping spirit energy move because, when you're here, you're kind of stuck. I'm glad that JoJo feels happy, but when that space turns, maybe then she'll be able to move on. I'm not sure how it works, but
Mhm.
um,
Yeah, I don't think any of us know for sure.
mhm,
And I've often wondered if spirits that haven't been reincarnated and that are still waiting on the other side, on the other side of the veil, they can still talk.
mhm,
And I have definitely found, I can think of a tea leaf reading I did, for example. I was reading for a woman whose son had passed and tragically young from illness. So it wasn't a surprise death. It was a sad death because he was only in his early 20s and he had a baby. It was just born. And
oh,
then he got cancer.
Mhm.
And I mean, it's truly tragic. The
yeah,
child will never know their dad. But right
right,
before I read for her, he appeared to me I wasn't looking for him. I didn't
Mhm.
expect it. I didn't know anything about him at that moment
mm,
because I hadn't even met this person yet.
right,
A young man appeared to me, and I can see him perfectly. Like I could see that he was like slightly unshaven, and he was maybe in his maybe like 23, 24, and I could see his baseball cap, and I could see that he was relaxed with a guitar. And then when the woman showed me the picture of her son, I my jaw just dropped.
Yeah.
And I said, did he play the guitar? And did he like to wear a red baseball cap? Because the picture didn't portray those things. And she started crying. She goes, "How did you know that?" I was like, "Because I think he brought me a message for you." And it was just that he is relaxed and at peace, and that he crossed over, and he wants you to let go.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I have had those experiences too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same. Yeah, those are beautiful experiences because it feels like whenever spirit does come through and they are where they're at peace,
Mhm.
they'll come through and just say, "I'm good. I
Yeah,
want you to be
that
happy
was
too."
what it was, and I felt
Yeah.
like his message was that he wanted his mom to, like, stop burdening her heart with his loss and to focus on his son and to have fun with her grandchild and to have fun with her life.
Right.
Because, a lot of the rest of her reading was about how she was suffering so much and she wasn't doing anything she enjoyed, and she wasn't even taking good care of herself. And I was
Mhm.
just like, perhaps this is your calling to refocus on yourself and your grandchild and to move forward with those things in the front of your mind instead of the grief.
Mhm.
Obviously, grief isn't linear.
Right.
Everybody has to go through their own grieving process.
Mhm.
But there also can be a moment where you can decide to focus on the people that are still with you too.
Yeah. That's
Absolutely.
very important to do. Yeah.
Mm.
So Rissa, you are also a tour guide
Mhm.
for ghost tours. And we're kind of getting towards the end. I'd love to hear a story about, a ghost tour maybe where you've experienced something or had someone experience something. And then
Sure.
the other thing I wanted to ask you that just before I forget did you ever have an experience that did terrify you or kind of scare you, and you were able to kind of, because you said you usually come in without fear and with confidence, and I have that feeling like about you, like you just have this overwhelming confidence, which is cool. I was just curious, have you ever been kind of taken back by a kind of a scary situation that caught you off guard or something?
Oh, there have been a few things that were scary. Okay. Well, because we're short on time, I want to go with a short one.
Okay.
So I do pay a lot of attention to my dreams, and I one night was having such terrible nightmares, like undefinable, but I knew I was waking up scared or crying or in a cold sweat. And when the morning came, my room is on the second floor and it faces another person's house. So when the morning came, there were handprints on the outside of my window,
Jeez.
it's like all over it, and then like pulling down through like the
Ugh.
pollen dust. There was no way somebody could made it without carrying in a ladder that would have showed up on the neighbor's ring camera. That is fact.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So I don't know who was visiting me that night, but I can tell you it sort of disarmed me for a little bit.
Sure.
Um, I had to cleanse the whole house. I had to spend some time getting grounded, cleaning up my diet, anything I could think of to kind of like clear through. Because
Mm.
whoever that was trying to come into my dreams and my room
Hmm.
was somebody who I'm pretty sure did not have my best interest at heart and didn't have a happy message to share.
Yeah.
Um, and I hope for peace for them, of course, but or whatever they were.
Hmm.
But I also didn't want to deal with them. I felt like going like, whatever you've got, it's not a me thing. It's gonna
Mm.
have
Right.
to be a somebody else thing. You have to
Mhm.
take it away. We did wash the outside of the window. Did a protective grid with salt and crystal, anything I could think of to kind of keep them from coming back.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So that was definitely a moment where it was like, okay, whatever I have on my plate for today, it has to get pushed back, and I have to take care of this other stuff
Right.
because protecting myself spiritually is important too. So yes, I
Yeah.
did have that scary experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So as a tour guide, so
Mhm.
this is probably one of my best stories. Um, I was giving a talk on Edgar Allan Poe, and we were in the old historic B&O railroad station in Ellicott City, Maryland. There's a ghost there named Charlie. Charlie is a very active spirit. He took care of the B&O for many years in his life during the Civil War, actually. He lived there. It was his station. He was the station master. And Charlie is still there, and he still takes care of things all the time. I learned that night that when I know there's an active haunting and I know who or she it was, I need to tell their story before I start talking about something else. Normally, when we talk about that station, we talk about Charlie. Whether it's just a history tour or a ghost tour, we talk about Charlie
Mhm.
because he's part of the history of the building. But I started talking about something else, and I never mentioned him at all. And two women that were on the end aisle, where there was just no other person over here, they both felt a freezing cold hand, grasp their shoulders. They both screamed and stood up at the same time. They weren't together. They didn't know each other. It wasn't some rehearsed act.
Mhm.
They both were like, somebody touched us. A man's hand was just on our shoulder. And I was just like, oh, Charlie, forgot to tell everybody about you, and it's my fault. I'm sorry. They did both leave. I'm not going to lie. They were
Yeah.
scared and very
Oh,
upset
yeah.
that they had a ghostly hand on them. And I did tell his story. And every time since, I don't start any other program without paying Charlie his respect.
That's awesome.
That is cool. But also, that's kind of sad that they left.
Yeah.
They could have heard, like,
They should give
you
you a
know,
big tip for that, because why
yeah.
else do you go on a ghost tour, right?
Yeah. Why would you go on a ghost tour if you don't want somebody? I don't know. I mean, no, being touched is
Yeah.
scary. It is, or
Being
can
touched
be.
is scary. And a
Yeah.
lot of stories that I've collected, the people who are the most afraid are the ones who get touched.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That sounds about right. It's kind of like in a fake haunted house at Halloween, like they're looking
Right.
for the ones who are most afraid to like mess with.
Yeah.
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 Last time I went through a commercial haunt, I don't think she meant to do it. It was like a haunted sleepover area in the haunted house. And
Mhm.
this girl accidentally smacked me in the face with a pillow, and one of my
Oh,
earrings came out. I was like,
Jeez.
wow, this is something. I was like, the whole do not touch each other thing. Where did
yeah.
that go?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Well,
she
and
was
Did you
then
like,
find
oh, sorry.
did you find your earring? Was
yeah.
that like
I
a
never did. It was totally dark, and I
Oh,
decided just to write it off.
Mm,
Like, that's
yeah.
gonna be a loss. Hopefully nobody stepped on it, but
yeah.
you know,
Oh,
yeah.
well. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, getting touched is probably, that cross into like the physical, and you're like, oh well, they can do that. What else can they do? Kind of a thing, right?
Well,
So
yeah. Well, I know we don't have much time left, but
yeah.
cat ghosts are the best because they do cat
Oh
stuff.
yeah.
And I have so many stories about cat ghosts. There's one at what used to be a very prominent restaurant in Pennsylvania, in Wrightsville, Pennsylvania, and the cat ghost would do things like just walk along and knock wine glasses down,
Yeah.
and then you'd hear the cat jump down, or you'd hear it purring, or any of those other things. And there was no
Hmm.
cat. It was a restaurant that would be illegal.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it of the many hauntings in that building, they had a very mischievous cat ghost that couldn't move
Kitty.
plates and
No.
objects. Yeah.
We have 6 cats, and we've had and we've lost 2, so oh god. The live ones are scary enough sometimes with what they do to try to kill you down the stairs. Well, or so we do want to give you some time also to talk about your business and what you do. I'm kind of speaking for Jess here, but I know that we're going to want to have you come back and tell us some more, because like you've been a very
I'd love
enjoyable
to.
guest. So, but why don't you talk a little bit about your shop and everything?
Sure. So I have a business called Tea and Smoke. It's online at teandsmoke.com. And you can book a tea leaf reading, a smoke reading, or a tarot reading with me anywhere in the world. I have different price points for different budgets. And then all of my programs are listed on there as well. So my online programs, my live in-person programs, if you happen to be in the Mid-Atlantic
Mm.
area. And then sometimes I travel. Later this year, I will be in Atlanta speaking there. So my schedule is always there if you want to catch me in person.
Awesome. Well, you've been such an awesome guest. Thank you so much for everything.
Thank you both for
Truly.
having me. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you. This is great. And obviously I will be on your site very soon. This is so cool. Well, folks, we are so glad that you joined us again today. Thank you so much for listening. And whether it is a Scotch neat or ghosts, keep your spirits up.